following is a conversation I had with David Palmer, a blockchain lead at Vodafone's IoT business. David's been very involved in IoT and blockchain for a number of years now, driving a number of strategic initiatives within Vodafone. His knowledge goes really deep in both IoT as well as blockchain. So there were some really great topics that we covered here. And for anyone who really wants to appreciate what's possible with the convergence of these technologies and where we are with respect to wider adoption, I really encourage you to have a listen because there's just so many useful takeaways here. David, really great to have you here. I'd love to just learn more about, where your head's been at with respect to blockchain this last few years. You come from a background of IoT, which you've been working in for a number of years now, but you've been really focused on blockchain for a while. And what are the big things that are on your mind and the big opportunities that you're really interested in with it?
Yeah, exactly. Conor, nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast, first of all. Blockchain, IoT, what can I say? What's on my mind? I think we are going through the biggest technological and business revolution and finance revolution of a generation, at least, if not more. And I think at the center of that are technologies like IoT and blockchain. Blockchain especially interesting because of the power to link industries, industry players, and business models together. And yeah, what's on my mind? I've been on the journey for the last 4 years exploring blockchain. First of all, it was okay. This is a really fascinating technology behind Bitcoin and later Ethereum. What's behind it? How can it be used? How can it be applied to my world, which is telecoms? And I started off 3.5 years ago looking at that, and I did an internet search, and there was very little on it. Very little talk about blockchain outside of finance and currencies and the cryptocurrencies. And so the journey then started to look at, okay, how can this technology be applied to enterprise? How can it be applied to telco? And we started to look at the big things of blockchain, so consensus, trust, smart contracts, tokens, and these are still the things that are starting to emerge at a more mature level now, which is okay. In terms of blockchain, how can blockchain expand my external automation boundary? By that I mean, there's a lot of work in industries and business about how you can expand an internal process, how you can expand things in your control. But as soon as an organization links with another organization or person they don't trust, then you have to show your passport, then you have to authorize your card, then you have to have a contract signed before you can do anything. And blockchain showed the potential to automate that because by providing a central ledger and trust, it gives rise to a lot of automation opportunities to reimagine processes completely for businesses. I mean, now we're starting to see that. I know I'm waffling off the point, but now we're starting to see that with COVID, for example, where all of a sudden, we've got to reimagine processes for trusting people in terms of their travel credentials and in terms of their health credentials. Blockchain's obviously coming into that in terms of these health passes. It's not the only solution, but it is one of the prominent ones because it allows it allows people to trust that health credential. Thereby, when you go into a country, rather than having to show that same health credential, the original paper copy to everyone, and for them to verify it, you can verify it once in the blockchain, and then others can look at that credential. And I think that's typical of the opportunity that blockchain provides on a wider level to automate processes in business. So absolutely keeping an eye on that, and a lot of other aspects of the technology, digital identity being one I've just mentioned, provenance of supply chain, obviously transactions, tokenization, and digital currencies.
Given how long you've been, immersed in the space, it must have been hard, especially in the early days as well, to get people interested. It's like, the classic case in point is like there's, Bitcoin, these financial speculation things, but there's, with that has kind of driven broader interest. But at the same time, to have been kind of on this journey for that long, you must have had a lot of conversations with people where you've had to convince them of the potential, utility here. And especially with all of the organizations where there's some really great convergence, as you say, between with IoT, blockchain, and also other things like 5G, of course, which we can get onto. But how's that been for you? Because it can't have been easy, going back 3 years or so, to do that.
So the first thing is I'll say, and I think this stands for now as well as 3 years ago, is people don't really know what blockchain is. That is the first hurdle you have to get through, and there is a deep association of the popularity of people exposing blockchain, and the benefits of it, and the price of cryptocurrency. So what I notice is is where you have cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum rising in value, people are fascinated with it. So you could have made all these millions. This currency is going up. What's behind it? Blockchain. Okay, I'm interested. When it goes down, then your voice in the organizations goes down as well. But on a serious note, no. I mean, I think it was very difficult because I think a lot of the community that were pushing for blockchain were visionaries. They were people who saw in a crazy bunch of people mining Bitcoin many years ago and starting the Ethereum project, a wider use of digital cryptocurrency and smart contracts for business and wider use in society. And let's remember, I mean, when did Ethereum actually go live? When CryptoKitties was the first application on Bitcoin, right? When was that? 2018. So there was actually nothing live. So a lot of the discussions earlier was, okay, this is fascinating. Which businesses are in this, right? It's only Bitcoin. It's only some crypto currency projects. All of the early foraging into blockchains from organizations were POCs and very limited outside of the financial sector. And there was a big discussion on scalability, and security, and in general the fragmentation of blockchain and crypto at that time. So yeah, it was a very lonely road, but what we tended to focus on was the potential. And my saying was, look, when you get onto a train, you're trying to get on a train, and in this case a technology train, where you think it's going to end up at the right destination. So you're trying to get on a train carriage with the right platform, with the right technology innovation potential that's going to get you where you want to go. And in that case, the potential of Bitcoin for telco was really about joining up. If you think of telco, there's not that many telcos out there. There's a few operators, but we have to come together in a collaborative way and trust each other. Roaming, for example, contract management, pricing, and there was a lot of potential there for blockchain to solve a lot of those problems and streamline processes. So we really took a visionary approach, saying, okay, what if we use blockchain and we were able to do this, and we were able to take this opportunities, or it presented a new business opportunity, and we took that approach, and I think that is what has got us through by shining a light that got people excited, that kept them in touch with the technology, even through times where platforms got hacked, or there was a lot of negative and a lot of negative publicity. We stuck with it. And actually, at the time, at the end of 2017 to 18, where we saw a big dip in crypto prices, when we saw the ICO bubble collapse, and we went through what we call the bloodbath, crypto winter, blockchain winter. You actually saw that in enterprise applications of blockchain, it started to pick up at that time, because the focus wasn't on cryptocurrencies; it was on how can this be applied to solve enterprise problems. And that kept going through that. So in answer to your questions, yeah, very difficult. Not a lot of people understood, but we kept an eye on the benefit and the vision that blockchain could take us to. And now I think we're in a period where we're starting to realize that, okay, positive, cryptocurrency prices are going up, so that there's a lot of projects, there's a lot of activity, DeFi, self-sovereign identity, smart contracts, just a lot of stuff, NFTs that are going on, that's going on in the wider crypto world. And that's mirrored now in the enterprise world, as I was saying, with sort of COVID health passes on decentralized self-sovereign digital identity, use of smart contracts, peer-to-peer transactions, provenance of supply chains seem to be the sort of main use cases that you're and provenance of data seem to be the main use cases that are coming up now in enterprise, and a lot of enterprises are starting to come together to form ecosystems for permission blockchains in that. So yeah, in a short answer to your question, it has been a very difficult time, but it just shows if you believe in something and you have a vision, as long as you keep to that and you keep trying to communicate the benefits of that, along with being honest on the risk, that you can get through some difficult times, which I think we have on this blockchain journey.
And given the complexity of the problems that you're trying to solve with with blockchain at Vodafone, do you think that we're talking always multi-year time horizons when it comes to large enterprises and the rate at which innovation is possible, just because it is so complex? Do you think you're still on kind of a similar path to what you set out to achieve originally? It's just that it takes a lot of time and you needed to prove out the technology. Or do you think that the innovations that are happening in places such as DeFi, NFTs getting a lot more attention and opening up more use cases, are they starting to influence your thinking, or do you feel like you're still very much so on this, it's quite a similar path to where you set out originally?
I think a lot of these things, the only difference with NFTs and some of the well, DeFi is slightly different, but the only thing with NFTs and DeFi, which originated in tokenization, which is sort of a conversation we've been having for the last 3-4 years, is that they're now popular. But to those of us who have been in blockchain and crypto, we've been talking. I mean, that was one of my key lines: tokenization is blockchain's killer app. I mean, 3-4 years ago, I was saying the same thing, and I think NFTs is just a form of tokenization, right? It's and DeFi essentially the same, combining smart contracts, to power the protocols. So I think the only difference is that these things have become popular, but they don't really change the fundamentals, because I think in big enterprises, it's all about having a strategy. It's all about how technology fits to a strategy, not just doing technology for the sake of it. And that is a mistake a lot of people in big organizations have probably made, which is, okay, yeah, blockchain's wonderful, let's put blockchain in. Why?
Yeah. So replace
Why?
this
What problem is
database
it
with a
solving?
blockchain.
Yeah, what problem is it solving? What opportunity is it presenting to the business? Whereas I think we took a different approach, which is, okay, what are the opportunities that we're seeing? And then how can blockchain be one of many components helping us to achieve that? And for a lot of businesses, if you're not a startup, you've got to look at your comparative and absolute advantages, right? So, if you're a bank, then you have advantages in trust. I think telcos have advantages in trust and connectivity, and somehow blockchain needs to augment that. You can't just tear it up and become a blockchain business, because you have shareholders and you have you have strategies and you have wider considerations, whereas a startup can say, all right, I'm going to go into DeFi straight away. It's difficult for established businesses. So I think it's more about sticking to your strategy and looking at how blockchain can augment that. So in that sense, when you consider that, these things have helped to bring about the right publicity and maybe get more stakeholder excitement, but they haven't fundamentally changed the strategy. And I think it would be dangerous if they had, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. And you talk about how blockchain can augment things, especially with IoT specifically. Yeah, I think that's an area that's fascinating to go a little bit deeper on and learn a little bit more about, especially for the listeners too, because on the surface, you've got your SIM cards, they can go into IoT devices, they're plugged into a carrier network. How does what are the advantages that blockchain actually brings to the table in for the IoT devices from a perspective of like a telecoms company like Vodafone?
Yeah, so I'll start out by then doing my speech on the potential of IoT. But if you look at the connectivity world, it's wonderful. We now have over 5 billion
Wow.
phones, right, in the
Yeah.
world, out of a population of 7.8 going 8 billion people. 5 billion of them and rapidly climbing have SIM cards and handsets. And if you go onto IoT, I think there's forecast for as much as 70 billion IoT devices in the next 5 to 7 years. It could be more. But we're getting into billions and billions of connected connected devices and people over telecoms networks and other forms of connectivity. And really, as we've seen through COVID, connectivity becomes the staple of business now.
Mm.
And we've proven it because the last thing you want at home through in this time is your broadband to cut off. I mean, that you're really paralyzed. Then you can do without the office, but not the connectivity. I think you're seeing that with devices. Billions of devices that are connected, and the issue you've got when you look at IoT is that number one, these devices are connected, but um, you know there's such volumes that you can't have these central entities for everything you're doing.
Yeah.
So, for example, when you start, so at the moment you've got 70 billion devices coming in 2025 or the next 5 to 7 years. Now you've got one model, which is okay. Each of these devices will have someone with a smartphone or someone with a computer authorizing transactions. We'll have contracts as we do now for every interaction between these devices, so they can trust each other. On one hand, and when you start putting the centralized entities into these huge volumes, it becomes very, very difficult to surface, right? Just
Hmm.
given the sheer volumes of it. And I think what the potential of blockchain here is twofold. So one of them is what the first thing I'd say is that there's huge potential in connecting, the connectivity world to blockchain in a industrial way.
Hmm.
So where you have the concept of handsets and devices with SIM cards being able to automatically authenticate into blockchain platforms and externally sign in those platforms. That's a huge potential
Hmm.
because on the one hand, the issue with blockchain even now is about adoption. Has anyone tried to use a MetaMask model wallet? Have you ever tried to swap these coins around on Uniswap? Yeah, we can do it if you're techies, but if you're my grandmother or someone else, they want the iPhone experience where you
Yeah.
click a few buttons. We don't have that. So adoption for the mainstream is not there yet. We're having in blockchain some institutional entrance to the market, but not mainstream yet. 5 billion handsets, 70 billion devices. If at a very high level you can connect those two things in an industrial way, then that will solve the adoption problem for blockchain.
Yeah.
But blockchain will solve the trust and decentralize, the trust and scale problem for telco. And I think I just look at it at that high level. So there's huge potential in that happening. And when you look at IoT in particular, you start to get into a world where you don't have the typical use case now. So if you're developing an application now, which you do very well, Conor, with your team, you'll start out with someone with a handset, right? And
Hmm.
that's the user interface. We'll have an app, we'll click, right? If you have a driverless car, or you have a connected cabinet, or an autonomous drone, or an EV charging unit, or a parking meter, or a toll, you cannot have someone, given the sheer scale of this, 70 billion,
Mm.
with a handset in the use case clicking yes, no. You need to automate that, especially where you're having a car to EV charger, a car to toll, a car to smart city service transaction. It needs to be automated. And then you look at that, well, how are you going to automate it? So on the one hand, you have identity, right? So the first thing is, right, how can two things that don't know each other uh, uh, authenticate.
Yeah.
How can they authenticate? And the blockchain can solve that decentralized identity. The other thing is, okay, if they do, how can you automate a transaction? Smart contracts
Yeah.
would be how you do that. And then how would you actually do the transaction peer to peer, not going through a central authority? That could be done again using blockchain capabilities for peer to peer transactions and to some extent even tokenization. Um, so I think there's a huge fit between telecoms, IoT, and blockchain. I think AI plays a role because I think AI, can act as a trigger for many of these things. Crunching data and feeding it and triggering transactions and handshakes between devices. But ultimately, I think blockchain is the anchor. It's the trust anchor that will play a role in this. Now, I think the difference in my vision and how it's matured over the years is that I'm not seeing one blockchain,
Mm-hmm.
at least in business. So I'm seeing this as a phased approach, and and actually listening to some of the stuff on Ethereum 2.0, I don't think they see one blockchain either. I think
Absolutely.
I heard about 64 chains that will be running, and you have a beacon chain, and then you have some of the other improvements around it. So I think our thinking as a blockchain community is maturing on every level to say, okay, chains will coexist. It's not going to be one or the other. You will have chains coexisting, and just like countries, where you have specialization and division of labor, you have one chain that's good at this, you got another chain that's good at that. So you may have one that's good at NFTs, you've got one that's good at identity, and they're sort of working together. And I think in the enterprise space, I'm seeing that as well. So I'm seeing that there will be many chains, many different blockchains in supply chain, blockchains for transactions, blockchains for device ledgers, blockchains for roaming, blockchains for provenance. Many different blockchains in business. But the problem that we're now solving is how you connect those.
Mm.
So how do you connect permission blockchains so you can have a trust between a blockchain trust layer? How do you have a resolver between those two things, between those two entities? And that's sort of where we're looking at, and how the vision has changed. It's not going to be one chain. There's going to be many chains. Not to the point where you have many centralized databases, but I think you have many chains that form one overall trust chain to execute a business model. And that's how we're sort of seeing it on our side. I think eventually, you will see an evolution to public blockchains,
Mm-hmm.
but at the moment, you're seeing ecosystems built around permissioned or hybrid blockchains, in the enterprise side.
And of course, with enterprises, they need to know who they're dealing with at the other end of transactions, and so
Correct.
it completely
Correct.
makes sense that side of it. I think in terms of almost summarizing, how well, my takeaway anyway from what you've said about how blockchain with IoT devices, what it does is it stops the person or whatever it is that's talking to the blockchain having to engage with their device as much as they would. It's like say if you, I don't know, park your car somewhere, you don't need to like open up a parking app and say, I'm parking here now, these are my details. From what you're telling me, that with IoT and blockchain, it would be possible for that to take place automatically because your car tells whatever infrastructure that it is parked in that place. And so that is like significantly reduces the burden on people to actually have to perform these interactions on behalf of these devices. And is that kind of a fair description of how it simplifies things a lot for people?
Correct. So I think you can have these zero-touch automated experiences. So you just, I think we're seeing it similar things with this. I think it's Amazon Go. So it's this technology where you just go in and pick up, and it knows who you are, etc. So you're not then looking at loading a payment credential and whatever. It's just automatic. And I think the same for IoT for consumers, as you're describing. It can definitely enhance the user experience. You're not having to log on to different passwords. You're not having to approach things differently. It's just automated for things, and I think that will play a big role in joining up the sort of or transitioning from the internet age to sort of web 3.0 as we call it. But I think the most promising side is on the business side.
Hmm.
Because for businesses, friction in the consumer world, friction causes a deterioration in customer experience, which can lead to bad business. But there's a direct relationship in business between friction and cost, and the ability to realize business opportunities. So I think in businesses, when you think of fleets, when you think of drone registry, you think of roaming, you think of a lot of the sort of macro business side. And blockchain has and IoT has an advantage in a number of areas. Number one, it makes the world bigger and more connected. So if you have an identity on a device that will allow you to speak to another device from another company, all of a sudden I have a business opportunity to interact with that device, to transact with that device, and to be able to conduct commerce and new business with that device that wasn't there before, because the previous way of doing that was setting up a contract,
Hmm.
paper contract.
Yeah.
So blockchain can make that immediate. So this whole real time world comes into play.
Yeah.
I think on the other side is if you look at IoT data, 75%, some estimates say, is not used, right? So we're collecting all of this data. There's massive investment in the data, but it's not used. And I believe part of that is because the use of that data is near real time, where it can impact a journey or a decision in business near real time. So, for example, the routing of a truck that's half empty,
Yeah.
which meets the needs of of a logistics company at that point in time. If you can direct near real time that spare capacity to meet the logistics demand, you've just increased the monetization and revenue of your truck.
Hmm.
In using data that was there at that point in time. If you take the vaccine example, and your truck happens to have the right level of cold storage for example, the Pfizer vaccine,
Yeah.
which may be rare, then again, that's IoT data as well as other data fitting into that, enabling you to increase the monetization of your logistics fleet in this case. So, I think there's two levels, as I've explained. One of them is connecting things and the sort of new business opportunities where devices from different ecosystems, different owners can start to interact using blockchain as the trust anchor. And I think from that, you have the automation of that with smart contracts. And then on the other side, it's about the data. Yes, the IoT is about data, and you're really seeing potential for that data to be used almost as the equivalent of a sort of distributed oracle.
Yeah.
That can feed into these smart contracts and drive decisions to increase efficiency and revenues for IoT estates.
And presumably 5G as well factors heavily in all of this as well, just because of the capabilities it provides.
Massively. So I think 5G low latency allows you to have allows you to have very high low bandwidth processing on the move, um, which is which is massive for IoT, massive for autonomous vehicles, massive for the sort of edge processing that's needed to drive a lot of these new business opportunities. And when you sort of combine that with blockchain, and you combine 5G with IoT, you've got a very, very powerful mix that will give rise to whole new business models. One of them, just looking at EV charging. How powerful that could be, where you have 5G blockchain capabilities, and IoT mixing there.
Yeah, absolutely. And with 5G, how far along the kind of adoption journey are we with it? Of course, a number of phone providers support it, and as a consumer, that's sort of where it bubbles to the surface. But from a sort of corporate perspective, what's kind of your view there of where we are?
Yeah, so I can't really comment directly on, I can't really comment directly on that. What I do know is that there is an aggressive strategy to roll the technology out in a prioritized way, and that we're starting to see it, evidenced in some of the end-to-end solutions that are being offered at the moment.
Cool. So you mentioned electric vehicle charging. Obviously, the green agenda is very high on the corporate agendas right now. Um, one of the things that's been announced previously is Vodafone's partnerships with the Energy Web Foundation. What's so appealing about the Energy Web Foundation, what they do, and why is it why does it make a lot of sense for Vodafone to work with them?
Yeah. So yeah. In fact, I put something out on LinkedIn on this when we had the tweet about the energy concerns on Bitcoin,
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, is this an opportunity for us to come together and make a sustainable blockchain using our technology, smart contracts, and connections to the grid, and real time protocols, and that was really answering a lot of the raison d'etre that I understand that Energy Web has. Which is how you can use blockchain to, give, to integrate, more devices to the grid, how you can use blockchain to have provenance of clean energy. And when you combine those two things, it does give rise to supporting a lot of things in terms of meeting this ESG and other sort of environmental targets of clean energy, because it allows more devices and people and businesses to participate in the grid, and it also provides opportunity for clean energy providence, and a lot more in terms of transaction capability. So we see, or I see Energy Web as sort of a key to this area, and a lot of the energy companies have joined. So yeah, it's something that we found very, very interesting. Of course, what's even more interesting is that we can directly link our SIM card
yeah,
to authenticate, as I was saying, onto that network, which is also very powerful when you put that into a connected meter or other utility device.
yeah, yeah. So in what like there was I think it was last year there was you discussed in an interview how Vodafone's demonstrated cars transacting with smart city payment services. You've spoken about potential for electric vehicle charging points. Are there any other things that you're really keen on seeing? Obviously touched on other areas like efficiencies with IoT data and the ability to say help with health passports and also vaccine deliveries. But there's some big areas that you'd like to also see blockchain having more impact and this convergence with the IoT.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so there's a few things. So in my head, I see a world where you have organizational wallets. You have wallets for people. You have wallets for devices. You have wallets for individuals and governments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think blockchain, and what am I saying there is the wallet contains the identity and it contains payment credentials. And it's a real shift in how we think about things, how we think about the identity of people, businesses, and individuals. And this isn't Vodafone. This is my
Yeah,
sort of thinking on this. But I see that as transitioning a lot the way commerce and finance works, yeah, and how business operates. Because when you have these wallets, you have the ability then to link smart contracts, which can automate a lot of the transactions, a lot of the finance, a lot of the models that we have. Um, yeah, so I see that as a sort of key thing to build on. I don't know where it will lead, but I think it will lead to sort of an evolutionary approach to how business is conducted. And I also see, I speak about a lot personally, this new economy of tokens. As I see it, some people call it the token economy. I call it the economy of tokens, where I see that organizations will have tokens. You'll have a lot of inter-token swaps. So you'll have a real-world version of Uniswap,
mm,
where you have this digital barter, and organizations, can use one token to pay for something else. So I was reading the other day that WeWork, are accepting Bitcoin. What if WeWork accepted a sort of UK government token, or they accepted another token for office space. And you start to get, I can transact my token for your service, etc. And you have this sort of digital barter, which could be a precursor to the way that business works. And I think those two things, obviously way in the future and quite conceptual at the moment, but I think they drill down to blockchain fundamentally changing the way we do business, the way we finance business, the way businesses communicate with each other, the way businesses, their people, devices, transact with each other. And I'm excited to see where that leads. I mean, who could have predicted, the developments in blockchain over the last 12 months? The ability to fundamentally reimagine, scarcity and unique goods in the NFT space. Who could have imagined, some of the so some of the things that DeFi have done, and who could have imagined, some of the progress that Ethereum and other chains have made, and are making. And you sort of look at that, and whether you agree with them or not, you're saying, okay, they've made a change, and they're shedding light on a possible way forwards. And I think the same thing, with the wallets, the economy of tokens, smart contracts, provenance. You look at those ingredients to business. I think, over the next 5 to 10 years, I personally think we'll start to see, an evolution of business using those capabilities.
Definitely. And with what's happening in the public blockchain domains, the decentralized autonomous organizations, yes, there's been, they've had their problems, and they're certainly not a mainstream, thing, so to speak. But at the same time, it adds this really interesting layer to the whole discussion, especially when you talk in terms of like the opportunities for much wider spread tokenization. Because if you've got all these different tokens, almost like infinite variations of them, you almost need to have these things that can rapidly swap them, but almost baked in at the protocol layer. And this is where these kind of true decentralized citizens can start to kind of emerge, and gets very interesting there. In terms of seeing where we've had these big areas of growth, though, and with of course tokenization, what's happening with NFTs and DeFi. Aside from like the corporate sort of initiatives there that you're working on, what do you think's next kind of for blockchain in terms of like the next big sort of bastion, so to speak, that it's going to be taking on?
I think we're there. I mean, I think all the components are very, very exciting at the moment. And I think it's just how you package those up into solutions, and then how you package those up into new businesses. So I'm not seeing that. Yeah, we're gonna see any new, rapid, rapid, new applications as such. I think we've got some interesting projects to work on. I think when you look at the Ethereum project and the Hyperledger projects, just doing a drill down on Ethereum, Ethereum 2.0, you've got 1.5 as well. And you're looking at that, and that's all about scaling and solidifying what we've got. And I think that same applies for enterprise blockchains and other projects we've got. It's about solidifying what we've got. I think the innovation is there, but how can we make this scalable? How can we make this cost efficient? And I think there's a lot of effort needs to go on the foundations now, because we've seen the promise. Now we need it to work enterprise grade. So I see there'll be a lot of focus on that, and that will help us to realize, some of the exciting innovations that are happening in the sort of wider blockchain world in enterprise. But in saying that, I still don't think we're done with tokenization. I think there is. I repeat my statement of 3 years ago. It is the killer application. I think we're now starting to see that. NFTs in business, very, very interesting. But I think the staples of business are, decentralized, self-sovereign, decentralized digital identity, and provenance in supply chain and logistics. They seem to be the ones that are that are getting a lot of traction now.
Yeah.
And I think if those win, we prove they can scale, if we prove the value, then they lay the foundation for applications on tokenization and other things to come in.
Mhm.
I don't think enterprise is ready for tokenization yet. But I think with some of the things happening in wider blockchain, and if we can prove in the projects that we have in those three areas, I think that adoption will come in the coming years.
And when we talk about the sort of adoption timelines, and where the jury's out in terms of whether blockchain more generally has gone mainstream. Certainly with like crypto, you see that for instance the Coinbase's wallet being number one in the US App Store, it kind of shows that there's this huge consumer interest and also so much interest in the speculation side. So I think there's an argument to say that part of it's mainstream. But when we think about the bigger initiatives that you're working on, that you've talked about, and the sort of time horizons for tokenization to really sort of find its feet properly, what sort of durations do you think about? Are you thinking next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Always, it's a moving target, right? But it's always great.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, look at it. So COVID is said to have accelerated digital transformation 2 to 3 years. I think it may even be more. Yeah. So other things remaining equal, I think we're starting to see blockchain projects come to life now in enterprise and business, which is really important. So you're starting to see live scaled production projects. And I think for any other technologies coming through, I think you're looking at 3 to 5 years, before we really start to see an impact. But it's a journey, so you've got to start now, and that maybe translates into that. But where you have a shock, an external shock like COVID, where you're forced to innovate very quickly to solve a problem, or where there's a new business opportunity where you're forced to innovate very quickly to realize that. I think blockchain will be one of the ingredients for that, and that may well speed up adoption in different areas. But I think for the core, to really see translation in big business, along with the regulation and everything that comes with it, and and the acceptance, the changing of processes that have been around for years. I think it's 3 to 5 years. Now, in saying that, it leads me to another point that we probably missed out, which is about CBDCs, central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
And that is an interesting thing, because we've spoken about the economy of tokens and the public blockchains, etc. But what we haven't really tried to assess is the impact of CBDCs on all of this, because that is essentially a play by trusted central authorities who have a lot of domain knowledge to say, okay, we see the advantage of digital money, digital currencies, and we want to now introduce that into our business models. And the question is, what does that mean, right? What does that mean to some of the already established projects? So, central the digital US dollar versus Tether, etc. So
got a few more
it'd be
reserves,
interesting.
the digital dollar than Tether.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see how that works, and if inevitably that will involve some sort of integration of or integration or coexistence with Bitcoin and Ethereum, or whether they become competitors. If they become competitors, I think the bets are off. I think if there's a coexistence and there's co-benefit and alignment, then it'd be really exciting, because I think in the revolution or the evolution that we're seeing in blockchain, one thing that is important to note in business is that the technology coexists. So I think when you're in a public blockchain, you just go on Ethereum, you build a D app, bam, everything's new. But you got to remember, in business, there's huge huge backbone OSS and BSS systems that already exist at the core of that business. So you can't just rip it off, rip it up, and start something new. Blockchain needs to be a part of that. So integration with legacy, how it fits in, how it plays a role, alongside these technologies. So in saying that, it's going to be the same for CBDCs, and wider crypto, because to transition from the finance and business system we have now to DEXs and DeFi, etc., is a really big leap. And I think what we've seen, even with all the popularity, it's a marginal business. The mainstream is, way bigger, maybe 95+%. So that transition, you could argue, or that digital transformation, requires the incumbent central banks and financial organizations to be a part of it, and the CBDCs is the first step. What we don't know is what happens then.
Yeah.
But they have huge domain knowledge. They have huge systems that scale, huge experience. So yeah, I'm watching that with interest to see how that translates.
Yeah. It's definitely fascinating to see just how many, how many regulators have really, well, central banks are embracing the technology and taking it very, very seriously. And yeah, no doubt. So it's not going to be too long before we see some even more big announcements there.
Excellent. Yep. Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah. So I think it's probably a good time to wrap up there now, David. It's been really awesome chatting. If people want to engage with you, or just reach out off the back of what we've discussed here, or just pick your brains about IoT, blockchain, and the convergence of all these technologies, what are good mediums for them to contact you or follow you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is my platform, the platform I use most. So yeah, my LinkedIn profile. Hopefully, we can post it on here, and just contact me on there. That's best. And I'm often posting on there about my thinking on events as they're happening. So that's a good way to engage. I think that's the best way to contact me. But also, for those of you who are engaged, you can email me as well and reach out.
Yeah, and no doubt you'll be popping up at more and more conferences as well, talking about this stuff. So it's yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot to say. There's a lot more to say than there was in the past, because I think the difference before is that we were talking about something that may happen. I think now things are happening, and there's a lot more to discuss. But it's still a journey we're working out as we go along. And I think organizations like yours, others sort of leading the way in development, have taken a lot of risks. And now that's sort of a beacon shining a light to some of the things that are possible. So I also want to thank organizations like yours and the innovators that have worked tirelessly on blockchain projects through the winters, through the very cold storms when it wasn't popular. For some of the incredible things that are happening, and that's giving us blockchain ambassadors, or people working in blockchain and enterprise, the fuel and some light to continue what we're doing.
Yeah, it's awesome to be at the frontier of this space, right? It's we've all been through the fair share of ups and downs, but yeah, as you say, we're in the best place now, I think, for the future.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much, David. It was great to talk to you and have you on as a guest today.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.